Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is Paige Hancock, Marketing Manager at Spok, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Today, we're excited to kick off our new webinar track, Clinical Conversations. And we'll be having a panel discussion and Q&A with Spok's Chief Nursing Officer, Dr. Nat'e Guyton, and Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Andrew Mellin. Before we get started, I would like to go over just a few housekeeping items. Everyone will be muted during today's webinar, but we still want your participation. Please submit your questions via the questions box, which is in your GoToWebinar toolbar, and then Dr. Guyton and Dr. Mellin will answer as many questions as time allows after the discussion. A recording of this webinar and the presentation slides will also be sent to all registrants tomorrow, so please do feel free to share these with others at your organization. And you'll also have the opportunity to complete an evaluation at the end of the webinar. We would love it if you could just take a couple of minutes to complete this survey. We truly take your feedback into account, and your thoughts help our efforts to provide relevant and informative presentations. And with that, we'll go ahead and begin our discussion. So our first question is, how did you become involved in health IT? Dr. Mellin, let's start off with you.
Thank you. I've always been interested in technology, and I had a very wise mentor when I was a resident who guided me and told me that I should also get an MBA if I wanted to do something with technology. And I did that, and I've been fortunate to be in a career where I started at a startup company that was acquired by a very large EHR company. I had the chance to work with a health system and lead their EHR implementation across 9 hospitals and 60 clinics. I was fortunate to again work for a vendor where we built some really novel real-time quality improvement solutions, and even had a chance to work at a company that was focused on consumer-oriented solutions for large employers. And so it's really been fortunate for me that I've had this culmination of many different aspects of health IT. And ultimately what I've learned and what I enjoy is being in the middle of what I think of a three-legged stool, that all IT or health IT projects really depend on the success, buy-in, and compromises between the clinical needs and the clinical leadership, the technology needs and constraints and challenges, and the business side. What are the business drivers? What are the business and operational concerns? So for me, it's always been a combination of those three-legged stool, no matter what I've been working on.
Thank you. And Dr. Guyton, how about you?
Thank you for having me. And my story is a little bit different, but kind of similar to Dr. Mellin. I was working as a Chief Nurse Officer and Mercy Health System, and we were implementing a huge CPOE project at that time in conversion from one platform to another. And I noticed that there wasn't any nursing representation, and all of my nurses would be involved in this. And so I went back and I got a certification in clinical informatics because I said, in order for me to be the leader of this, right, from a clinical perspective, I need to understand, the basics, the life cycle, the language, and really not just to rely on my nursing background, although that was important to bring to the table, but to understand the language as I sat at the table with technology leaders, right, and technology vendors. So I completed a certification. After that, I asked to be involved in the project. I went to our health system CEO and I said, listen, I know we have multi-hospitals here within our system, but there's no nursing representation from the beginning. And I really want to be a part of the selection process, the implementation process, and I need to have nurses involved in training other nurses and also being resources and building the staffing that's necessary to really drive this project and make sure there is true implementation and adoption. And so I kind of wiggled my way onto the platform with the doctors and IT and on the team, and I became an integral part in that. And so when a position became available at the system level, I kind of volunteered to be the Chief Clinical Informatics Officer and really have the voice, if you will, not just from a nursing perspective, but clinical perspective for the whole entire enterprise as we changed platforms and also rolled out CPOE. So it was kind of recognizing the need for having nursing at the table early on and serving as that nursing liaison or nursing leader. So I became the voice not only to the CEO, but also back to the clinical staff, and I kind of helped bridge that gap. And so from there, it became a passion for me. And then I was able to look for other roles that would also like to blend that nursing clinical perspective with that technology piece. So what I love about my role today, and a lot of nurses ask me this, how does the CNO role fit in a technology company? And I think what I love about it is I don't have to abandon, if you will, my nursing background to do what I do. And so being able to be the voice is kind of who I am and my purpose.
Thank you. And that really leads right into our next question, which is, how do you think that the roles of nurses and doctors have been evolving with technology and all the changes in the recent years?
Well, to the point I just made, back 10 years ago, when I was out there in nursing and nursing leadership, the role of CNO, CNIO, nursing informaticist, or associate CNO that has a technology, background or responsibility, that didn't exist. So just having the field today, the diversity of having nurses at the table, and nurses who are scientists, with an analytic, data-driven background, nurses who are researchers. So I think the role of nursing has expanded in that technology space, where this is a new field that we can come in and really look at the clinical component and the outcomes of our patients. So that's one way. The other way, I think, data, there's a lot of data today, and we can use that data and technology to leverage the quality care delivery. Before we had books and we had charts, and there was no trending of data, and if it was really late, 30 to 60 days behind. So now we have real-time data for which we could capture and really use on a day-to-day basis and to care for patients while they're in the hospital, right? I also think the role today in nursing and along with technology, it has enhanced care team communication. So communication is anywhere and everywhere and anytime, right? We don't have to wait till we're together in the hospital at the nurse's station to communicate. We can communicate with team members who are in the physician's office or in the home care space. So I think technology has helped us communicate better. It has also helped us with mobility, right, and interprofessional relationships. So I think our relationships as nurses with our patients and those around us on the care team has enhanced because we have accessibility to them.
Yeah, thanks, Nat'e. And similarly, on the physician side, it's been really interesting for me. When I started this career, EMRs were just getting in place in the ambulatory clinics. We were selling and working with the CIOs at health systems. Fast forward now 15 or so years, and it's completely shifted. Obviously, EHRs are totally in place, but I think more importantly, and probably the biggest trend that I see is that physicians and other clinical leaders now view technology not as sort of a tool for automation, but technology is viewed as the tool, the primary driver, the way to hardwire processes to help organizations achieve their quality goals, their patient experience goals, their financial goals. So technology is now not just something that you have to do to run your bills, but technology is the core enabler of virtually every kind of process improvement initiative that an organization is undertaking. And to do that, you need clinical leaders driving this at the table. So now you see the physicians as CIOs. You see the CMIO role evolving from one of focus on adoption to one where they are looking at how do I use the technology investments and the technology opportunities to help achieve and drive these organizational goals. So it's a really exciting time that we're looking at these tools as the drivers and the core of how we improve patient care.
I know that since you have both joined Spok, you've been very busy flying across the country visiting customers. What do you guys think are the biggest challenges that you've seen them facing?
Yeah, I'd say there is no biggest challenge because there are so many challenges that all leaders of health systems are facing right now. I think sort of if you would peel away all these different things, it comes down, in my mind, to you got to do better with less resources. You're going to have to do better with your shift to value, which means your reimbursement is going to be tied to quality. It's going to be tied to your overall cost. It's not just going to be fee for service, but you're going to have to make those infrastructure investments to support that with less capital potentially. It's going to be looking at how you're doing care team collaboration. This shift that I've felt and been involved with as a physician, where as a resident I was trained to be captain of the ship. I had to be responsible for everything. I had to know everything, and everyone was counting on me, to this model of collaboration and team-based care, where we are all essentially peers, in my mind, in helping the patient achieve the best outcomes. And finally, I think another big trend on the physician side is the workforce engagement. And what that means to me is really physician burnout. I talk to most of my physician peers and friends. It's hard to be a physician today. We've put a tremendous burden on them, whether from these two things I've talked about earlier, especially with the shift to value. And we've put a lot of technology and regulatory burdens on them. So I think a lot about how can we use technology not as an additional burden for them, but how do we use technology to make their life easier? How do we give them back time when so much of their time has been taken away? There's a million other things that challenges that our customers are facing, but these are some of the big ones I think about. Nat'e?
I would also add and really echo on that workforce engagement piece, because as we go into the next slide page, this question is about end user adoption. And so that's critical, right? That workforce engagement and adoption is critical to success of any IT implementation or project, if you will, right? Because they call them project, but we know how huge this is. And so having the right people at the table early on. So healthcare organizations must ensure all stakeholders are involved. And I say this because we go into organizations all the time, and when they want to do a reference, they ask our other customers, how did you get people to adopt, right? How did you get people to utilize this? Or we measure success of an implementation on adopters, right? How many users do you have? But I always find that the number one issue with adoption is the inability of getting the right stakeholders at the table at the right time early on. And for example, when we start projects and we kick off, we see everyone there. There's the CMO and the CNO and all the, the directors, and they're all there at kickoff. But the same folks were not there when we decided to sit down and brainstorm the project, when we decided to develop the strategy, when we decided to look at the budget and allocate funds to nursing, to physicians. So often I see technology starting out from a physician standpoint, right, or a complaint, right? People come to you and say, well, the physicians are complaining about X, Y, and Z, so we need to solve this problem. And it becomes a problem-driven project and not a strategic project and not a whole organizational project. So I always say to some of our customers before we implement, make sure we have the CNO, the CMO, the quality director, the risk manager, the population health leader, the patient experience leader. Anyone that has a C-suite or director level title should be in the planning process, because we often find that adoption is hindered because we forgot to involve the key stakeholders of the hospital. To Dr. Mellin? No, go ahead. He's looking.
I was nodding my head to what Nat'e was saying. My view of this is something that I've experienced over and over again in my career. You take the same piece of software, the same implementation team, the same implementation methodology, the same customer expectations, and one customer goes fabulously. They love it. The next customer, it's a disaster. And when you peel it all back, and I think about this a lot, what made the difference? And it comes down, in my mind, to one thing. Did you have a leader involved who was involved from the beginning, who knew how to address problems and look for the answers, not for the problems? They looked about how to align the organization, as Nat'e was saying, They made sure the project stuck to the core values and goals and the benefits that they set out to achieve, and they worked collaboratively in a multidisciplinary way, and they had a really good understanding of the change management process. So whether it's a small departmental solution or the enterprise EHR, I've experienced this again and again and again and again. And so, I just emphasize what Nat'e was saying and emphasize with you as you're going out on these projects. And these are, any change project for clinical teams requires leadership and change management and a very focused and multidisciplinary effort to get there. So the success, I've been with lots of software, nothing's perfect, but a good organization can take any piece of software and make it shine, and a bad organization take a wonderful piece of software and make it completely fail.
Right. And while we're talking about end-user adoption, right, another thing that I see a lot, Dr. Mellin, is the inability to sustain post-implementation support, right? So like that was a nice way of saying it, right? So what is that? So we go live with the project, right, with the platform, and the vendor's there for 14 to 30 days after, and you have everyone rallying for you, and then maybe the organization extended for 30 days, and, everyone goes away. And that's when the support is really needed, right, from an organizational standpoint. So in my experience, what I've done is I've built in end-user support into the project. So at one of my hospitals, I wound up building a 24/7 nursing support system. And I built that into the budget. I staffed that. I identified the nurses. And it was a physician project, but I identified the nurses because these were the nurses who knew the doctors, right? They trusted them. They had a relationship. And so every year I would budget for that. And, of course, my nurse leaders who are on the phone, I did have to go and substantiate that every year, right? I had to keep logs. I had to look at what percentage of calls came through, but it really helped with adoption for the physicians and the nurses in our technology project. So post-implementation support is key, and also empirical outcomes. Know your outcomes. Know what you want to see, because we always talk about ROI, right? Know what you want to see going out of it, and really measure those outcomes month by month.
Yeah, go live is just the beginning. That's what I always say.
Just the beginning. Next slide.
Thank you. And another that kind of falls under probably this bucket of, what else is keeping clinical leaders up at night?
Yeah, and before I start this is a place for audience participation. I would love for people on the phone to just take a moment as I'm talking and Nat'e is talking to just type in the chat box what's keeping you up at night. We'd love to hear that, and at the end, Paige will go ahead and highlight some of the answers people put in. So please do that. And this is, again, just a tiny fraction of the things I think that are keeping people up at night. So I talked about before, more with less. What does it mean for consumerism? And I think the thing I hear over and over again is, how is your business model going to be disrupted by whether it's Apple or the CVS with the Minute Clinic or the telemedicine vendor or somebody else with something that's not yet invented. People are looking to disrupt the traditional business models, especially around patient experience and consumerism, and someone's going to win. And I think health systems, as we know, are not often the first movers. I think another big thing is how quality and reimbursement are tied together. And I think that's one thing, because as quality, especially with physicians, you have to build processes that support the physicians with the nurses and the rest of the care team to make sure your quality is at the level you want it to be. Because if you don't, it's hard for physicians to do it all themselves, even though many of these things are physician-driven orders, as an example, or processes. And that's going to have a substantial and growing impact on your bottom line. I think the other thing that keeps people up at night, besides issues like cybersecurity and patient safety, is the unknown. There is so much uncertainty in healthcare today. I think no one knows what the reimbursement world is going to look like in 2 or 3 years. We know it's going to be different, but we don't know what the new government is going to look like. So I think the only thing that organizations can continue to do is address the needs of their patients as thinking of them as consumers, continue to aggressively drive towards quality, continue to find ways to take cost out of your organization, and look for those gaps, those places in their organization where things can fall through in that sort of Swiss cheese of patient safety. The communication gaps in particular are an area where, I actually just had a CMO told me they had a study done at their organization. Something like 70% of their patient safety events were due to communication errors or gaps. So all those things keep people up at night. But again, as Nat'e speaks, I'd love for everyone to be putting in things in their audience response box around what's keeping them up at night.
And I want to add to that, we have nurse retention and recruitment up here. And as much as we love technology, right, sometimes it's a double-edged sword, especially when it comes to retention and recruitment. So I hear from nurse leaders, for some of my seasoned nurses who've been here, 444 years, it's sometimes the new technology or the pace of technology can burn you out, right? It's like we have to learn something new again, or we have to have another piece of device. I just want to take care of patients. So I think, retention and recruitment is something that has always been on our radar, but the new nurse, shortage, it's really, really have been impacting some of our nurse leaders. And on the recruitment end of technology, sometimes that's what we love about it, because we get some of the new millennials or new nurses who are coming in, and they're going to be our next level care providers. If we don't have that latest and greatest technology like the hospital down the street, it becomes a competitive advantage, and we lose some of that next generation of nurses, where then our seasoned nurses are saying, I just want to provide care. So it becomes a continuous cycle where we're not having the seasoned nurses who are going to be there to precept and teach the new nurses. So nursing recruitment and retention is something that's definitely keeping us up at night, and we're trying to figure out innovative ways to balance the two between the seasoned nurses and some of the new nurses, but also add the technology that will help you through this shortage. Next slide.
Thanks, and it looks like you guys really nailed it right on the head. I've just been reading through the comments as you were speaking, and a lot of dittos and, a lot of worry about, the future. So looking at that, how do you think that technology will play a role in patient-centered care as we look to the future?
Yes, when I think about patient-centered care, it's really all about patient engagement and including or expecting the patient and the families to be involved, right? Whether that's through mobile apps, patient portal, telemedicine. Sometimes if you look at patient-centered care as this separate project, right, or entity that we're laying over top of what we're doing, but the most important piece in patient-centered care, and there's many components, right, but it's how do we involve the care team, the patient, and family members? How do we get them the most up-to-date data in a way that they can digest it? Not just having a portal with numbers on it just to have a portal, but is it explainable? Is it readable? Is it something that their family member in Florida can look at and really utilize to help prevent diseases or, help them with their care? So I think when we talk about patient-centered care and technology, it's all about that patient experience and engagement. And so we'll have to have technology that engages the patient, the family, and also the care provider, and kind of that triad to keep them all together. And the fact that they can have all the same information at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. I think, the way I look at this is there's a lot of things already happening that have really enhanced the role in patient-centered care, whether it's telemedicine and wireless home devices and consumer tools like the Apple Watch. There's things like open notes now, virtual visits, and this pace is just staggering. But one of the things that really attracted me to Spok is the gap that I think Nat'e was talking about, and I think it's really reflected in this picture, is that there is this network of people and stakeholders and caregivers and patient and family members and others that are caring for this patient. And I think if any of us have had personal experiences in the healthcare world, we know that there are still tremendous gaps in communication between what goes on in that process of someone seeing a specialist and the orders being placed or note getting put in the chart to that plan being made sure it's reconciled with all the other physicians, and even more importantly, making sure that whether it's a patient, the home health agency, the skilled nursing facility, whatever it is actually executing and following that plan and knowing when things are deviating from that path. So, in my mind, I think this is still an enormous problem that we have right now is how do we get everybody who is some way responsible for that patient on the same page every step of the way to make sure that the best care that we know of and the best care that the physicians and the rest of the care team have decided on is actually happening. And when things are not going according to plan, things are acted on as fast as possible. So that, in my mind, is the exciting future, is how do we connect all these dots and how do we help all the stakeholders contribute in the best way for patient care to keep that patient healthy or achieve the best outcomes.
And tying into that, what do you think any additional hot topics that will be big in 2017 for healthcare technology?
Yeah, I think there's so many hot topics right now, artificial intelligence, genomics, augmented reality, bots, whatever it is. But I think the one thing that, if you look at these topics on the screen, which I imagine every single organization on this call is thinking about in some way or another, the one thing that ties us all together is communication. As the systems say are moving and the systems are already focused on moving and analyzing the patient data. But one of the things that I don't think has been done is looking at the patterns of communication with that same microscope that care processor and outcomes are being put under with the analytics engines. So how do these communication gaps increase your risk in your organization? What are the delays in communication processes that impact your patient outcomes and patient safety? How do you ensure the entire care team is always on the same page and is updated when they need to know what that new information is available? So I think, how do we look at the role of communication as it plays in all of these care model redesigns, all the technologies that are existing today? It doesn't matter what shows up on a dashboard if it doesn't get communicated and hardwired into a process. It doesn't matter if you've diagrammed out a really nice flow chart, but no one has an easy way to communicate with each other. So I think there'll be many hot topics, but I think the one that at least I'm focused on being at Spok, but I think the one that most organizations should think about is how does communication play a role to support the goals that you're trying to achieve with the other technologies that you have in place today.
Thank you, Dr. Mellin. I agree with that. And I just want to outline 5 hot topics or trends that I also see that's aligned with yours, Dr. Mellin. 1, mobile strategy for nurses, aligning with what physicians already have in place. Right, so a lot of our organizations may have a mobile strategy, a mobile device, or even mobile application for physicians, and there are a host of platforms out there, and Spok being one of them. But I do see the alignment of those technologies with doctors and nurses. Right. 2, secure texting for nurses. Right. 3, physician ordering via text. Ooh, right? Ooh, that's a big one. Because JCAHO did come out last year with the, ruling, and then they pulled it back, and so I suspect that'll come back. And we will be looking for someone who can really help us in that space and help us meet the JCAHO workflow, not just to put an order out there, but how to acknowledge and read back and respond, right? Number 4, nurse BYOD with mobile apps. So nurse, bring your own device. Now, again, some of our organizations already have physicians bring your own device, but some of them are still looking at, nurses bringing their own devices with mobile apps, or just nurses having their own devices. Now, I do want to point out, selecting a device for nurses is not a mobile strategy, because I think sometimes we get that mixed up. And number 5, which is one of my innovative favorites, is virtual nursing, which is up here. And then Dr. Bowers and the Online Issues for Nursing Journal did some research around virtual nurses and avatars, answering the question about the nursing shortage and recruitment and retention, and using avatars as nurses who could do some of the tasks and fill in that true team nursing, model. But virtual nursing is a real thing. There are hospitals out there doing innovative studies right now with virtual nursing, and I do see that as a trend and a hot topic. Next slide.
Thank you. I just have one last question before we get to some of the audience Q&A that has come in. How do you think that communication would work in an ideal world? I know you've touched on that a lot today.
Yeah, we touched on it a lot, but I think a couple of things come to me in mind when I think about communication between care teams. I think in an ideal world, if this works, right, the optimal full patient care, right? So there's the optimal delivery of patient care, because that's what the communication is about. But I look from a tactical standpoint, I look at care coordination, right? I look at interprofessional communication, and I look at our nursing, physician, respiratory therapists. I look at our workflows, and I would say even the efficiency of our workflows would be optimized in an ideal world where we talk about communications between care teams. And before I hand it over to Dr. Mellin, the one word I do want to leave you with when we're talking about care teams and optimization and communication, it's really not about technology. It's more about trust. And how do we get to a point where we can trust one another as clinicians and for effective communication? The technology should leverage that. It shouldn't be the de facto point between do I trust what they're saying or not. But it's more about if we're going to develop and deliver care team or the team approach care delivery, we cannot allow communication to drive that. We have to have the trust to be able to do that, and we have to produce that healthcare delivery model. Remember, technology is just the component that's going to leverage that for us. It's not going to be the human piece of it. So trust, I think, will be key in the ideal world.
Yeah, for me, I worked many years as a part-time hospitalist, and as I thought a lot about my days there, what I realized was I was spending a lot of my time thinking about how to communicate and how was I going to share or ask information, and not spending that time actually communicating. So, the couple things I think of in the ideal world is, one is what I think of as this concept of frictionless communication. If I have something I need to share, when my colleagues want to share with me, I just want to get rid of the frustrations and the challenges that exist in the world today of figuring out how do I get in touch with that person, or who do I get in touch with for that information? What's the best way to get in touch with them? What's the right device? How do I communicate the right sense of urgency? How do I make sure that that person's received it and acted on it if that's necessary? So taking away all of those friction points that every caregiver experiences when they're trying to communicate, I think that's number one. And the second thing for me is a communication tool that both really anticipates both my needs and my patient's needs. And when I think about this is, how does that communication tool get me the information that I need when I need it, whether it's generated from a device, whether it's a result that's important to me that I need to act on, or whether it's something that I think we'll see more in the future of this concept of bots that are constantly looking for events or changes or importance in patient care that are important to me. So I think those two key trends will be something we'll see over the next few years, is removing a lot of the friction points between communication and more tools that don't require me to pull what I need, but instead push to me in a way that doesn't cause alert fatigue or overwhelm me, the kinds of information I need to provide better care for the patient and to keep everyone in the care team informed and up to date. So I think we have time. We can open a couple of questions.
Great. Thank you both so much, Dr. Mellin and Dr. Guyton, for that discussion. We will take some time now to answer your questions as the audience, and it looks like we've had a few that were submitted already. Just a reminder that if you do have a question, please submit it in the questions box that's in your GoToWebinar toolbar. and we'll answer as many as time allows. And certainly feel free to submit it. If you have to drop off, we'll follow up with you offline as well. So our first question is directed more at Dr. Guyton. Why have so many organizations been reluctant to adopt BYOD for nurses?
What we see today is more of a security issue. You know, having nurses come with their own device and really having IT place security components on their personal device. So it's been kind of twofold. Nurses are saying, well, I don't want my job to have access to my device and put, you know, security measures on it. And employers are saying, well, you know, people may download things on their phone and it may become unwieldy, right? I think many of our hospitals, we have more nurses than physicians. And nurses may be under union contracts or they don't have personal contracts like physicians do. So sometimes it's been very difficult to just, how do we, you know, get our arms around this beast of, you know, we may have 2,500 nurses that we're going to allow them to bring their phones, and how can we put security, you know, devices on them or put security apps on them. But what I'm researching and proposing to hospitals, especially if you have a successful physician BYOD program, I'm asking hospitals to just look at that and pilot that same program on maybe your ICU nurses. So I'm really kind of proposing a provocative question to organizations saying, why can't we do it for nurses? Why can't we do the same thing? Instead of making it complicated, right? Why can't we just take the same program and do a pilot on one unit and maybe sign contracts with nurses or look at stipends? But really the honest answer that I'm really hearing from organizations is so many nurses, it's unwieldy. Who's going to follow it? Who's going to enforce the rules? And how are they going to do it? But if you look at the flip side in terms of your nurses are likely utilizing their device in your hospital right now. So, you know, let's look at cost and getting patient information and really how can we leverage care through a nurse BYOD project. Because, like I said, I guarantee nurses are utilizing their device already. And then there are ways to have secure measures on a nurse's device while they're in your hospital. So I would venture to say, have the dialogue with your CIO, your CMIO, your CMO, have the dialogue with your friends and just push back a little bit and say, well, maybe if we do the same thing that we're doing for doctors and do a pilot and see if it works. We do have one of our customers that's doing a pilot with 150 nurses on a particular department, right? So all the surgical, the post-surgical, the med-surg, and the pre-surgical units, they're doing it with there. And they've been doing pretty good.
Thank you. And a follow-up question that came in, what kind of security do you implement on BYOD solutions to make sure that you do fit in with the compliance and privacy requirements?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge. I mean, there's certainly MDM solutions that you can put on there, and I think both Nat'e and I are probably not the right people if you want to get into the weeds on what's the right solution. I think one of the real challenges, especially in the physician space, is, you know, I've heard this term, the race to be the first person to put an MDM on the device because iPhones only carry one, for example, so or only let you do one. So I think that is a challenge, and if it's something that you want to do, we have some more experts in our organization who probably work with you on different options. But you know, that's part of the reason why, for example, the Spok mobile app is completely sort of enclosed and secure, and allows you to have some level of confidence, or a good level of confidence, that if something happens and you need to essentially kill the app and kill the data on there, you can do it, and the data that's on the device is secure.
Excellent, thank you. Another attendee question here. You've mentioned or talked a lot today about solving challenges with technology. How do you see organizations measuring success when they implement the technology?
Well, a couple of things, and we were actually, Dr. Mellin and I was just talking about this. From an organization perspective, we know that some of the JCAHO regulations, right, in terms of patient safety, alerts and alarms, those things are a regulatory given, right? But when we think about patient satisfaction, when we think about nurse satisfaction, again, recruitment and retention, reducing burnout, those are the measures that we look at when we're looking to build and implement our technology. From a nursing perspective, the nurse-sensitive indicators and also the guidelines that are associated with MAGNET, which to some degree are a large number of the nurse-sensitive indicators, but we utilize those indicators as well as a starting point. And when we sit down with each of our organizations or our customers, we look at their strategic objectives and their vision and say, okay, do you have care consortiums? Do you have certain measures that you're using? One organization said that they wanted to increase efficiency, right, from the ER to the med-surg unit out to discharge. So we looked at productivity and efficiency, discharge time, door to balloon, so there's a lot of, quality-based outcomes that we utilize across the organization and also specific to nursing or physician-related as well. And I also don't want to forget the ambulatory outcomes as well. We look a lot at the patient-centered medical home and, of course, meaningful use.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I was just going to add, what Nat'e said, and with any technology implementation, it's really key up front to think about what you're trying to solve with it. Technology is just a tool. So I think all the metrics Nat'e asked, you're not going to measure all of them, but it's so important to pick what are the most important ones for your organization that are aligned with your goals that you're hoping to solve with these solutions. Understand where you're at before you start implementation and continue to monitor this as you implement it and you see adoption. Because otherwise you're going to be in a place where you're going to, people will want to know, was your project successful? People will know, is it worth the investment? And so it's so important up front to figure that out.
Thank you. And it looks like, unfortunately, we are out of time, so we'll go ahead and conclude there today. If we were unable to get to your question, we will be sure to follow up with you offline. And we'll also be sending out the slides of the PowerPoint to all registrants tomorrow. If you'd like to chat with a Spok representative on the topics that we discussed today, you can do so by using the link that's in your chat box. And you can also continue the conversation with fellow attendees by using the hashtag SpokWebinar on Twitter. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook to get all of the latest news from Spok, as well as industry news and trends. Thank you all again for joining us. We hope that you found this webinar informative and that you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.